Hi, I hope you're well. Today we're looking at Acts 25, and this will be the last video of the week. Three more videos will be coming next week to finish off the book. Acts 25, then. It's a fairly mundane chapter, isn't it? In fact, Packer, a scholar, observes that between Acts chapter 25, verse 13, and Acts chapter 26, verse 32, that passage, not much really advances in terms of the narrative of Paul's trial. Yes, different things happen, but the situation doesn't really change that significantly. Within this chapter, we hear about King Herod Agrippa II. I think sometimes in the New Testament there are so many Herods, it's kind of slightly difficult to know which is which. So I thought I'd just fill you in. So King Herod Antipas was the king who beheaded John the Baptist, and his successor was his nephew, King Herod Agrippa I, who bore a son who was King Herod Agrippa II, who had two sisters, Bernice and Drusilla. Drusilla we saw yesterday. So that will just help you understand who exactly King Agrippa II is that we see here. As I mentioned earlier, Acts chapter 25 is something of, there's a real mundanity about it. And I actually think that this should be an encouraging thing for us. Often we have the perception of Acts as God is just moving everywhere. He's doing incredible things. And so when we look at our lives and compare the miracles we see, it can be really discouraging, I think. I'm sometimes discouraged by reading the fire of the early church, the kind of the beginning of the book of Acts, early church, with our church today and my faith, and be discouraged. But actually what's interesting is that Jesus, in Acts 23 verse 11, we read that Jesus stood with Paul. Let me read this verse to you. It says this: the following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." Perhaps this is an answer to the question I posed in the video of Acts 21, where I asked, was Paul right to go to Jerusalem and defy the prophetic words against him? I don't know. That's for you and I to take to God and discern. But what I think is really interesting here is that we have this verse in chapter 23 where Jesus very powerfully stood with Paul. Paul encounters the presence of Jesus so incredibly physically. How encouraging was that to him? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Back to the mundanity. I think often we can go to church or we can go to conferences and we experience the Holy Spirit. We experience the presence of God. And then we go away and it kind of just feels low. You just feel low sometimes. It's, you maybe get the conference blues, or you just come back into life and if only my relationship with God could be the same there. I think what's interesting is that's sort of what is going on here in Acts 25, in this fairly large chunk. There's no written account of the Holy Spirit really encouraging Paul. Luke doesn't write that in. In fact, there's a real mundanity and work there. It's interesting, in my dissertation I've been learning that actually the difference between the natural and supernatural has only existed in our language since the Enlightenment. That before then, God was it was accepted that he was a part of the natural. It was an accepted part of his providence. Generally accepted anyway. And so my encouragement and my challenge to you today is, do you rely on that high with God? Do you rely on that real intimacy, those times of intimacy with the Holy Spirit? And I'd encourage you to take that to God, because he wants you to know that wherever you go, he's with you. He lives in you. And when God is silent, that doesn't mean distance. I hope that encourages you and blesses you. It's been a pleasure to journey with you over the last week as we read Acts together.